I was reminded this morning that when the service is done, perhaps even as it's going on, titles are attached to the sermon. So we have a title, and the title is Discipleship, Citizenship, and the Commonwealth. So what I'm going to be doing is moving from an engagement with the Gospel in Mark to a reflection about elections. Those of you who know me a little bit know I'm not going to pass up an opportunity to think about issues of faith and politics. And then I will say something about the idea of the Commonwealth. So first, discipleship and the gospel. Now, I was a little bit surprised that I recognized this, because this is actually the first time in this cycle of year B that I preached. And year B in the Episcopal and the Revised Common Lectionary features the Gospel of Mark. And we've been engaged in the Gospel of Mark pretty regularly over the past several weeks. And I would just say that this is no one thing to sort of read the passage that's assigned, and then to think about that passage in the context of the whole gospel, which is a literary construction. And there are certain characteristics about the Gospel of Mark and the emphasis on discipleship that our Gospel selection today illustrates. But first, the Gospel of Mark. It's, of course, one of four canonical Gospels. And the fact that there are four canonical Gospels, they are different. They have similarities, but they are also different. Suggests to us that from an early point in time in the history of the Christian community, there were differences. And there's important ways in which the Gospel works. One is it has no birth story. Jesus simply appears as baptized by John the Baptist and calls the disciples. So the emphasis on the disciples is really important. And in our passage today, we see a transition. And we see Jesus working with his apostles, moving from place to place. And we also see that there's some unresolved tension in their relationships. I said that they're not quite sure all the time what he's saying. And that's interesting because in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus does things and then someone inexplicably says, oh, tell me about it. Don't do that. Now, this is a topic that has been widely discussed in terms the work of the theology of the Gospel of Mark. And if you look it up or if you Google it under Messianic Secret, you'll find that there's just a lot of material there. One of my graduate school classmates has kind of added to this corpus with a 2-volume, 1,000-page commentary on the Gospel of Mark. So, having said that, I will say that when my wife Jane asked me what I was going to do in this sermon, and she was a little nervous, frankly, I said, well, I've really been doing a lot of review on the Gospel of Mark. And she said, you probably don't have to share most of that. I love you, sweetie. But the kind of critical emphasis here is on discipleship, the misunderstanding or the incomplete understanding of the disciples, and Jesus's staring them down, saying, you know, you're not quite getting it. And of course, they could reasonably retort, you're not quite telling us what we're supposed to get. But then he takes a child and says, the one who receives this child who has no agendas, is just learning to understand, receives me, but also the one who sent me. So the model of discipleship here is certainly not having it all worked out. If anything, it is the opposite. The model of discipleship here is keep working on it. Stay on that journey, keep working on it. Now, there are other accounts in the Gospels, but the Markan account, which we look to during Year B, has this theme. A couple of weeks ago, oh, there she is, our rector, preached, at least in part, on the Syrophoenician woman, and kind of reminded, well, I mean, I'm not going to quote her exactly, but she said, this might not have been Jesus's best day on the road. Close? Because, you know, he didn't quite embrace her, frankly, didn't quite embrace her the way he was telling the disciples they needed to embrace a child. But the idea here is keep working on it and be careful, this is my translation, about thinking you have your agenda completed and you need just to go and execute that agenda. Okay. That's Mark. All right, it's the first day of autumn. And as a headline in one of the newspapers I saw yesterday, yeah, I'm still one of these people who sees newspapers, early voting has begun in some states. Not here, but early voting has begun. And it just is important that one of the things that we as disciples know we have to keep working on the questions and the challenges of our citizenship. This is a very tough season. It feels as if it's been going on forever. The issues in the election are multifarious and polarizing. And they really put kind of into question, or really they may be a maximal stress test on our constitutional system. And the polarization cuts across many dimensions. It cuts across culture, it cuts across race, and it cuts across religion. And one of the consequences of this polarization, at least if you kind of read and think about the newspapers, or if you listen to the news channels, is that religion, and particularly Protestant American Christianity, is typecast in a way that really doesn't reflect the diversity of our religious experience. But conservative evangelicals are now a demographic category that makes a lot of news. Episcopalians, not so much. I am kind of intrigued that in a month, just before the election, the Episcopal Church will install a new presiding bishop, Sean Lowe, who is now the Bishop of Erie in northwestern Pennsylvania and the Bishop of Western New York. That's a very interesting story. Very little news coverage. You can Google it, but then you can probably find and read everything that comes up. So our story is scarcely reflected in the ways in which kind of religion is represented in this election. But we actually have, I think, something to say. And I hope that we can keep it in mind as we prepare for these next 40 or 45 days. In Illinois, we have, at least compared to my previous experiences, a long and somewhat complicated set of options to consider when we vote. But when we do vote, and we think about the individuals who are standing for our consideration, I hope that as disciples and citizens on the way we can embrace the notion of Commonwealth. Now, Commonwealth is a kind of, it's a word not used much, but a small number of states of the United States actually organized themselves during the constitutional period as commonwealths rather than states. Massachusetts, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Kentucky. Interestingly, the territory of Puerto Rico is also known as a commonwealth. But this idea of commonwealth is grounded in a notion that we are kind of on a path together. We are on a path together as disciples of Jesus, and we are on a path together as citizens of our nation. And that notion of together and that notion of path is what we share in common and makes us part of a commonwealth. So my purpose now is not to speak about particular candidates or even particular issues, but to characterize a frame of reference to ground us as we face this next period that leads to election. And I think that I would have to hope that contemplating the Commonwealth is really a better question to consider as we prepare to vote than the question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Amen.